Hey, what's up, guys? I'm gonna do a quick 1 week rundown of everything Yang related. Some things that's been happening with the Yang campaign this past week. So I guess first off, we'll start off with Yangapalooza. That's happening today. It's actually going on right now. So Yangapalooza is going down. Weezer is performing. Andrew Yang is going to be there, and a very special guest, which is Evelyn Yang. She is going to make her first real public appearance. She's going to be doing some press along with Andrew, and together they will start championing the new 2020 vision for Andrew Yang and the campaign. But this time, the speaker, the messenger, is going to be different. And so one of the weak points for the Yang campaign has been female voters. Not too many, there's a lot of women who support Yang, but overall, that's one of their weak points. And so hopefully by introducing Evelyn Yang, changing the messenger might just be what's needed to gain a little bit more traction. And also overall for the campaign, I think it's a great look, because when you vote for Andrew, you're really getting a whole package. You're not just getting Andrew Yang, you're getting his wife. You're getting a glimpse as to how she would be as a first lady. And I think that's really important. And, showing that he's a family man, and getting a more holistic picture of an American family, I think that's a fantastic image that no one really has outside of Andrew Yang. When you think of any of the other candidates, you don't really see a family as really who you're putting into to office or position. You're really just thinking of one individual. But in this case, it's a little bit different. So there's that. Also in the news, we've got Kamala Harris pretty much sliding in the polls. She's down to about 3%. In Iowa, both Yang and Gabbard have surpassed her. So that just shows that, this is sort of what happens. Once upon a time, and when I say once upon a time, we're talking just in the span of a couple months ago, you had Kamala Harris saying things like she's, most certainly a top tier candidate. And now these are things that it's not clear at all. In fact, I would say she's definitely not a top tier candidate at this rate. So that's another thing in the news. Also, one other thing. So on the Andrew Yang Slack channel, one of the people in the campaign actually made a post about certain things related to PACs and super PACs and the campaign. So the whole idea is that if there is a PAC or super PAC, that there is no real direction of what the super PAC or PAC does and the campaign. So that's the primary thing. And this has been a big controversial thing about Andrew Yang not being very clear on his stance for PACs. So there have been videos, and of course on his campaign website, where he talks about just getting rid of Citizens United, getting rid of this idea that people are running with PACs and super PACs, and the whole corporate money in politics. So the issue was that he made a few appearances where people questioned him on the math super PAC. So there's the math super PAC. It's just a bunch of people completely unrelated to the campaign itself who want Andrew Yang elected, and they formed a super PAC. And so what the super PAC enables them to do is essentially raise an unlimited sum of money. I'll repeat, an unlimited sum of money, right? And then they can use it pretty much for any candidate that they desire. So as you can tell, that's a problem in politics in general. But when Andrew Yang was questioned on it, he pretty much just said, well, these are the laws on the books. But he didn't say he didn't want their support. And so because of that, people have been, giving him some pushback. Some people have been bringing up the fact that Bernie Sanders had a few different PACs support him back in 2016, and in fact, right now, one of the major figures in his campaign right now, which is Nina Turner, she's actually the president of a PAC called Our Revolution. So people have been, giving some pushback on that, but I think the primary distinction between those PACs and this PAC is that those PACs ensure that the donations are for individuals, and Our Revolution isn't a super PAC as far as I understand, but the whole concept is very controversial, and people have been taking issue with that, and Andrew and some of the statements that he said. So that's what's been going on. Also in the news, so today you had Yangapalooza and Fred the Felon. If you don't know who Fred the Felon is, there's this guy named Fred. He was one of the first truck drivers that Andrew Yang got the opportunity to speak to when campaigning, and he voted for Trump, and pretty much he just got yanked. So he got yanked, and he got yanked so much that right now on his truck, he has it wrapped in humanity first type of thing, right? So he got the money for that not through the campaign, so he doesn't work directly with the campaign, but he got some money, and I believe it's from a PAC. So there is some other organization that champions universal basic income, and they were able to fund this opportunity for him. And so that's where he got the money, along with individual donations and so on. So the thing is, he showed up to Yangapalooza, and I suppose he didn't realize that you needed some sort of ticket in order to be a volunteer, right? So you could go to the main event, but to do some of the volunteer and meet with the press and stuff like that, he actually needed some sort of pass or some sort of ticket. And he drove all the way from San Francisco in his wrapped vehicle, very well known. The campaign knows him well. He's had, a few different appearances at different official campaign events, and Andrew has called him out numerous times. In fact, on the last debate, Andrew Yang mentioned the trucker named Fred when they asked this question about this kind of like, goofy, childish type question, where it was like, hey, tell us something that you've learned, or something like that. It was like, what, like, are we interviewing like people for candidates of best friend, or what exactly are we doing? But he was asked a question about that, and he mentioned Fred. But the whole point is, he went to Yangapalooza and he was rejected. So he got rejected from that opportunity, and then he started just pretty much going crazy. He got really upset, dropped a few F-bombs here and there, and reasonably so. He was upset, right? So you have this guy doing pretty much everything that he physically can to be associated with the campaign and make sure that Andrew Yang is elected. Taking a lot of money out of his own pocket, taking days off so that he can be with the campaign and engage with the campaign and so on. And then he gets to an event not knowing that you need a ticket to do this particular thing at the event, and then he gets rejected. So he started dropping some F-bombs, and he's like, F you this and F you that, and so things, got a little out of hand. And that's all available for anyone to see. So that was not great. But I think based on that response, I think it's pretty clear that if anyone in the campaign catches wind of this, that they'll probably make sure that at every event that there is something reserved for him so that he gets in. But this goes back to the discussion on PACs and super PACs. So in the Slack post from one of the members of the official Andrew Yang campaign, they made a post to remind everyone that if you are a leader or a member of a PAC in any type of leadership role, that you cannot be a volunteer in any leadership capacity for the official Andrew Yang campaign. So as an individual, you can both be a member of a super PAC or PAC and volunteer your time, your efforts, your expertise with the campaign. But once you achieve any type of leadership position, it's all bets are off. So that's a really interesting distinction, but just trying to be in accordance with any FCC rules and violations, that's just something that needs to be considered. So I'm not sure if part of the reason why Andrew was getting a lot of that pushback was because not Andrew, but Fred was getting a lot of this pushback was because of his association with a PAC or super PAC. So it's not entirely clear, but he was not very happy. And even when presented with, someone else's ticket, he was like, I don't want their ticket. He went off on the bodyguard, and, it didn't look great, especially at a Yang event. So hopefully that issue is resolved now. As far as I understand, that's been the case. So that worked itself out. So there you have it. In terms of other news in the campaign, Andrew was able to raise the 1.5 million that he needed. So in less than a week, the campaign was able to raise the $1.5 million that they needed to roll out some new ads. In one of the more recent ads, they've shown Evelyn Yang in the video, as well as their 2 children. And, they spoke about Medicare for all. I guess one topic that's noteworthy is this whole issue about Medicare for all. So I think that there is certainly a resistance from a majority of progressive news outlets who aren't particularly fond of Andrew Yang, and they never were. They never particularly were. I think one of the concerning things about that is that early on they pretty much refused to cover him because they didn't particularly see him as a progressive. And so they would never particularly shine a light on it, and then they would notice that a light critique of Andrew Yang would result in heavy dislike ratios on their videos. So Andrew Yang was pretty much like a bad word, right? It was someone who they disagreed with, but they wouldn't really dare say that they disagreed with publicly, because they knew, hey, if I say this, the comment section is going to come after me, the dislike ratios are going to be really high, and hey, it might even affect my bottom line. So a lot of people have been avoiding it and avoiding him in general. But as he continues to stick around in the campaign and do pretty well, and his campaign is growing, they can't help but start to have these discussions about him and his policies. And so right now he has a Medicare for All policy and plan. So what do we mean by Medicare for All? And I think this is the major issue a lot of people have had, and something that I think he should change. So right now he's calling his healthcare plan Medicare for All. And, there's there's about 10 people still running very seriously and are qualifying almost consistently at this point for these debates. And everyone is using this term Medicare for All, right? You have people like Pete Buttigieg who are saying, my plan is Medicare for all who want it. It's like, well, it's all who want it. So what we have here is a situation where Bernie Sanders has, really made the lead in terms of pushing boundaries and, setting the new standard. So his standard is Medicare for all, and essentially everyone else is some derivative of that. And I think that when we co-opt the term Medicare for all, it invokes in people's minds an idea of a plan that more than likely isn't the plan that they have in mind. So when you say Medicare for all, most people are thinking of Bernie Sanders' plan that he came out with a few years ago. So this is their conception of what Medicare for all is, and it's pretty solid and rigid. And it's the reason why you have people like Pete Buttigieg who are, sort of co-opting the energy, co-opting the enthusiasm for Medicare for all, and then adding at the end for all who want it to give people the idea that it's exactly the same almost. The only difference is that there is a private option. Private industries aren't going to just go out of business, that you can keep your private plan if you desire. The only problem with that is that it's almost directly in contradiction with, the standard Medicare for all, right? So I think co-opting the term is not very good, because it requires everyone to, it really just muddies the water. Because if you have Andrew Yang saying, I support Medicare for all, right? And it's the exact same term that Bernie Sanders is saying, he wants Medicare for all. And it's the exact same thing as Elizabeth Warren is saying, I want Medicare for all. And even Joe Biden is saying things like, I want Medicare for all. And, when you have all of these things and they all mean something different, it's really important to make that distinction. And so even though the plan themselves, those plans are actually distinct, you may need to actually use a term that's distinct in order to give people that very clear initial impression that this is different than everything else that they've heard. It's almost like if a new person, emerges, comes out of the blue, like Kanye West. He decides he's going to run for president, and then he's like, hey, one of my proposals is the freedom dividend. And then when you ask him what the freedom dividend is, and he says, well, it's a dividend that we're going to give $1,000 a month, to everyone who's making under $25,000 a year or something like this, right? And then, so the problem with that is, you can debate whether or not that's a good plan, but the major issue is the person who's known for the freedom dividend is Andrew Yang. And when you invoke the term freedom dividend, in people's minds, they have this picture of what Andrew Yang has presented. And when you're meaning something completely different, and then you have two people on stage, Kanye West now saying, I'm for freedom dividend, and Andrew Yang saying he's for freedom dividend, we don't know what's happening, right? The American people aren't going to know what exactly you're saying. because there's too many people using the same term but meaning, two different things, right? So I think that that's something that, maybe he should consider. I, looked at some of the comments on some other videos, and people have suggested, hey, maybe you should call it Freedom Care. Maybe you should call it, whatever, to give it sort of his brand on it. At the same time, in order to galvanize that much energy around a plan that's brand new, it's going to be very difficult in comparison to, putting out ads and just having on your website this general idea of Medicare for all. And if you're a lawyer or, someone who's really interested in debate, then you would argue that, yes, this is literally a Medicare for all plan, and that everyone will now have access to healthcare, right? So, there's different perspectives on it. My particular perspective is it's not, the best idea to, co-opt a term that means something, completely different and has been for years, and then now, use it and it means something completely different, right? So like, Pete Buttigieg saying, I'm for Medicare for all who want it, I think it's like a little snarky thing, but it's, it's just call it something else, because it's not Medicare for all, So a lot of progressives, not a big fan of Yang for those reasons. Tons of them don't believe that the freedom dividend will work. And I think the major issue that I have with those progressives is that when you ask them if UBI by itself is a good idea or a bad idea, they all agree that it's a good idea and this is the direction that we need to move. But the problem is they disagree with Andrew Yang's particular implementation. Now, people are different and they have their particular viewpoints, often set in stone after a certain age, and that's fine, right? So the issue is not that they disagree. The issue is they won't even mention Andrew Yang, or they won't even mention their generalized support for a UBI, a robust UBI that they believe in. They won't even put it forth. They don't even want to use the term UBI because they're afraid that if they use it, it'll galvanize support around Andrew Yang, and Andrew Yang has a plan that they disagree with. So you have a lot of people being silent on progressive policies just because they disagree with the messenger, right? Not to mention, they're not considering the implementation of a UBI in general. The major issue that standard progressives have with Andrew Yang's UBI proposal is that it does not stack on top of existing welfare programs in general, right? That is their primary grievance with the plan. Over and over, it's said every single time. If you look at any video of people who don't like Andrew Yang, I promise you, more than likely, it's going to be in there. They're going to say, well, why doesn't it stack? Now, the problem with all of these positions is that they're not supporting a UBI in general. They won't even discuss it on their platform. They're too afraid that Andrew Yang is going to rise in the polls by showing their support of a general UBI. But they're also not considering what does it take for a UBI to get passed, right? The reality is this: we live in a country that is very divided at this point in our political history. It's very clear it's been this way for quite some time, and it's certainly the case right now. And if you want a UBI to get passed, it has to get passed, right? We have both Republicans and, we have Republicans or conservatives, and we have liberals and Democrats in this country. And so we need something that has bipartisan appeal. And Andrew Yang, his plan is designed in a way where if you are a Republican or conservative, you are elated when you hear that it doesn't stack and that people get to choose whether or not they remain on these social welfare programs and hop onto the $1,000 a month train. And the reason why they love that is because they are under the impression that a good majority, perhaps, of those people on those social welfare programs, or at least a significant amount of people on those programs, will then come off and choose the $1,000 a month option. So that's why they're so happy about it. Now, if you're a liberal or a Democrat, you're happy about it because you see an opportunity for you to essentially, work towards the elimination of poverty in the country, right? So in doing that, you're happy. You're happy that everyone gets some type of money from the government. So all of his policies tend to have this sort of, it depends on who you are and how you see it, perspective. And it's really the best of both worlds, right? So it's something that Republicans can sign off on, and it's something that that Democrats as well can sign off on. So that's what's going on there. I don't suspect that he's going to make any changes in terms of the name. I think it's a little bit too late. We don't have much time until early state voting begins. So that's what's going to happen there. Andrew has said in the past that his main focus is not Iowa. And it probably has something to do with their, the way that their whole voting situation works. I think you have to be at like 15%, and then if you don't reach that, then all of those supporters then have to choose amongst the remaining candidates. And so pretty much if he doesn't poll at 15%, it's a wash in that particular state. Another controversial point that's come up recently is Andrew Yang discussing potentially being a vice president to Joe Biden, or Joe Biden being a vice president to Andrew Yang. And a lot of people weren't very happy about this. I know one guy in particular on YouTube, he wasn't a big fan of that, and felt like he needed to reconsider his support for Andrew because he didn't view Joe Biden as a progressive, and thought he was more emblematic of all of the things that he wanted changed, everything from money in politics to just plans, and as a politician, just someone he didn't support. And I thought about it for a while, and for me, I was initially, when I heard that, I was, number one, surprised. Surprised in a way and not surprised in others. Because he has mentioned before in numerous talks where the only person who comes to speak to him after a debate and pretty much is in full agreement with Andrew is Joe Biden. And so I thought about it initially. I wasn't a big fan of it. I'm not a big Joe Biden fan. So I'm more here for the support of Andrew. But when thinking about it, I think a poll came out recently, and I believe it was in South Carolina, and Joe Biden was number one, and he was polling at about 30%, and that's huge. And despite all of the mishaps that he has had throughout the campaign thus far, he's still polling extremely high. He's still top 3. And so the reality is, if Joe Biden somehow, and I don't know how this would happen, but if it does happen that he does actually win the election, I would want Andrew Yang in his cabinet, one way, form, or the other. Whether that's in a vice president capacity, I think that, you know, it would just be great. I think that if Andrew Yang is a part of the picture and he's still championing a universal basic income, I think that's overall going to be a win for the country. So I thought about it and I said, well, it's probably a, you know, a best of the worst case scenario. So one of the worst case scenarios is that Andrew Yang doesn't win, right? It's possible. And if that happens, the question is who wins? And it's probably going to be someone who's polling very high right now if it's not Andrew Yang. And so if it just so happens to be Joe Biden, I think there's at least some degree of comfort in knowing that Andrew Yang is part of that picture. So, you know, my official stance is, you know, I don't like it. I'm not excited. I'm not enthused with Joe Biden in the slightest. But if Andrew Yang is part of the picture, I think that overall it'll be a win for the country. So that's pretty much what's going down this week. So Super PAC talk, Joe Biden, Medicare for all. You know, these are the top things that's been buzzing in the Yangosphere. So right now, just setting our sights on upcoming events, and just making sure that Andrew has all of the resources to secure the election and, you know, secure the bag. So that's pretty much it. Just want to make that, you know, pretty quick talk. Tell me what you think. Tell me, how do you feel about Andrew Yang using the term Medicare for all? How do you feel about Joe Biden? How do you feel about his responses on super PACs? How do you feel about, you know, relations between super PACs and the official campaign? You know, how do you feel about his chances of winning? And how do you feel about our $1.5 million raise and Evelyn making her first real introduction in front of the American people? How do you feel about these things? Let me know in the comments. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.